Good morning, everyone. What fear St. Paul must have felt during the ordeal recounted in the first reading today. Fear of real persecution, fear of perhaps being stoned, fear even of death. So let's talk about fear. You see, there's good fear and there's bad fear. Good fear is fear of the Lord. Now, a lot of people are oftentimes confused by this phrase, fear of the Lord. Some of us take that to mean that, I got to always be afraid of God, always watchful because, he might smite me. But that's not fear of the Lord. Real fear of the Lord, when we say this as Christians, it means having a deep sense of reverence, respect, and awe of Almighty God. Real reverence, real awe of God himself. Because you see, there's two different actual definitions of fear in the English language. There's fear of actually being afraid of someone or something, and then this deep sense of awe and respect and reverence. And it's this second one that is really important for us, that is really what it gets at the heart of fear of God. And so this fear of God is a good fear. Another fear that we might consider good is when it stops us from doing some evil or from sinning. So this is something akin to, I guess you can kind of understand this fear of that stops us from sinning as something like, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z because, I'm afraid that it'll offend God. Afraid. So there's a fear. And so it's in the early stages of the spiritual life, this can be a help, this fear of offending God, right? And so that's a legitimate thing. But as our spiritual life progresses, as it develops, we can't stay in that fear of offending God. What we do, though, is we move from this fear of offense to wanting to do something for our beloved, wanting to do good for him. So instead of being afraid of offending him, it's like, I'm not going to say a bad word or whatever we're doing because I love him. It's out of love that we are animated instead of fear. Early on, again, in the spiritual life, this is something that, it's kind of innate, and we can we don't want to offend God, so out of fear of offending him, we're not going to do X, Y, and Z. But again, as our spiritual life progresses, it has to develop into something that is based and animated out of love. Love for God, love for neighbor. And so I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z, not because of fear, but because I love him. And I don't want to offend him. Not because I'm afraid he's going to punish me and I'm going to see the fires of everlasting hell. It's because of love that we stop doing these things. So there has to be that transition. But I digress. And finally, we have bad or worldly fear. And this is an inordinate fear of physical harm, or a fear of being ridiculed for the sake of Christ, or a fear of losing some societal standing or human respect because of our belief in Jesus Christ. This worldly fear causes a soul to flee from him because of the hardships which a Christian life demands. This kind of worldly fear cannot be what animates us ever. Because if we let this worldly, disordered fear take over, if St. Paul in the scriptures today would have let that worldly fear take over, fear of death, fear of persecution, fear of being stoned, fear of being ridiculed, he would not have stood up for Christ. He would have left. He would not have made converts. Instead, it's his love for Jesus Christ that animated him in the first reading, that pushed him to mount a defense, to stand before the Sanhedrin. It was the love of Christ that made him stand before the world and proclaim Christ resurrected. My brothers and sisters, worldly fear is what we must flee from, so that with St. Paul, we can stand before the world with courageous hearts and proclaim hope in the resurrection of Christ. Because Christ is truly risen. We're still celebrating Easter. We are still an Easter people. We are constantly trying to proclaim to the world that he is risen. He is truly risen. because this is our message. God bless you.